tired of the same old memorization, clickbaity opening videos here on YouTube? Well, then this video is for you. I'm going to show you the main ideas in the Italian game for both sides. I'll not just focus on one side and promise you the world if you follow this video. Instead, I'll show you the main ideas for white and for black, and then give you 5 additional motives that you will encounter often if you play the Italian game. With this knowledge, you will understand the positions that arise better, which helps you both understand the theoretical moves and not having to memorize them with move trainer or stuff like that. And also, when your opponent goes offbeat and plays something that is not considered theory, you will actually know what you're supposed to do. Let's start with white's main ideas, and the first one I want to share is playing d4 and controlling the center. Now, this move is very often supported by the pawn push c3, and we want to get a strong center, and once you get a strong center, you usually have better piece placement. How can this happen? For example, if black plays bishop to c5, one of the main moves, you go c3, knight is jumping out, and white immediately tries pushing for d4. We will later on see how black has to respond to this, but if black just does, for example, a trade on d4 and then pushes the bishop back, now white has a super strong center, can further push the pawns forward, for example d5. This knight needs to go back on e7, which is kind of sad. We can still push e5. Look at this super strong center. Black is going knight g4, we can maybe castle as white, we can bring out our pieces beautifully, and white has an amazing position right here. Black's bishop is kind of stuck, we might play d6 in the future, the knight on g4 is kind of out of play, and so white has an amazing position here. So pushing d4 can allow us to push back the opponent's pieces and to have better developing squares for our own pieces. That's one of the main ideas. It can happen immediately, but if we go back to the starting position, it can also happen slower. So let's say black is playing knight f6, we go d3, now the bishop is coming out, we castle, black castles, and now you will often see that white is still trying to play c3 and later on wanting to play d4. So that's one of the main ideas. As a general idea, when white is getting to play d4, and there's nothing wrong with white's position otherwise, right? So here you can see sometimes this pawn might be hanging, sometimes, as we see later on, there are checks happening. So if there's nothing concrete happening and white managed to play d4, in general, white has achieved their idea and should be slightly better. White's main idea number 2 in the Italian game, and you will see that especially on the lower level, I would say 1500 and lower on chess.com, is a beautiful pin on g5 to d8. Let's look at how this can happen. We can again say that black is playing knight f6, also happens with bishop c5, it will be similar. Now we push d3, we play a little bit slower, okay, bishop c5, we castle, black castles as well, and now we have this idea of playing knight to c3. So no more pawn c3, but now knight c3, different idea. Black is playing d6, and now we play bishop to g5. Now we get this pin going, and one of the crucial ideas here is to follow it up with knight d5. That's why we want this knight on c3, we follow it up with knight d5. This can really end badly for black. For example, sometimes what happens is black is just playing rook e8, we push knight d5, there's a pin going on, and the most logical, or what many players are doing here, is h6, trying to, oh, go away bishop, please, please, but then we take on f6 with check, pawn is taking, and we take h6, and we won a pawn. So main idea number 2 is pinning this knight on f6 with bishop to g5, and then following it up with the knight d5 move, putting pressure on that knight, destroying the pawn structure in front of the king, and sometimes having this idea of winning the h6 pawn if black decides to play h6. That's main idea number 2 and can be pretty powerful. And then main idea number 3 for white. I'm not a huge fan of this, but let's be honest, it will happen a lot if you're playing black, especially some people might get tempted to try that, is to attack the f7 point very quickly. One way of this happening is if black plays knight to f6, So white doing here? One of the moves is knight to g5, just immediately trying to put pressure on this f7 pawn. This leads to a lot of theory. Okay, d5 has to be played to stop this, right? We take here. Now, again, black shouldn't do this. You might have seen a trap video, oh, how to beat the black side of the Italian all the time. Then we can take here an f7, yada yada. I don't want to bore you with the theory. It's just important to understand the idea. White might go for this idea of attacking f7. But there are other ways, a bit less obvious ways to do that. For example, if black plays bishop to c5, again, we can go back to our c3 move. Knight is coming out. d4 is played. Now, spoiler alert, the right way for black is to take and then give this check on b4, which leads to white giving up a pawn on e4. Okay, so knight to c3. And then there are sometimes these lines where white is playing queen to b3 and putting pressure on f7. So for example, knight is taking here, castle. This is again, could be a trick line that you have seen somewhere. Takes, takes. If the bishop takes, we are not saving our rook on a1, but instead we play queen to b3, attacking f7, and this is already very, very good for white. Again, not boring you with the details here, but this is just the third idea. Somehow trying to use that bishop on c4 and exploiting the weakness on f7. I'm not a huge fan of it for white because this is always kind of a, I hope my opponent will make a big mistake, otherwise it probably doesn't make as much sense what I'm doing. I don't like this type of openings, but especially if you're playing black, it's super important to know that, well, there are trap videos out there and people might try to go for some idea of hitting f7. So as a summary, there are three main white ideas that, well, either you can go for with white or you need to be aware of with black. Idea number one is grabbing the center with the pawn push d4, very often supported by the pawn on c3. Second idea is to putting the bishop out here and pinning this knight on f6, putting pressure there and trying to either destroy the pawn structure in front of the king or maybe even win some material with it. And the main idea number three is getting after this pawn on f7 or just trying to attack it several times. And mostly this is based on kind of hopes to win quickly and a lot of tactics, a lot of memorization, a lot of opening traps involved. So what is black doing? Well, mostly in openings, black's main ideas revolve around trying to stop white's main ideas, okay? This is not as sexy as saying, oh, this black opening is OP or whatever, but it's just the truth of how opening theory in chess works. Black tries to neutralize white's ideas, and then, well, if you do this well, then you probably have an equal position. So main idea number one is stop d4, or even more specifically, find ways to counterattack after d4. So one of the main ways, for example, to try to stop d4 early on is by this move knight to f6. Now, it has drawbacks, as we saw already, but knight to f6 is trying to attack e4. So the main idea here is saying, oh, you have to, or one of the, white moves is playing d3, so now I slow down d4. So that is one thing to keep in mind. The move knight to c3, first of all, would stop this pawn push. So d4 is less strong as well. But also there is this nice tactic taking on e4, knight takes e4, and now playing d5. Okay, so this is one of the tactics you might have seen again in theory, but this is just one way of avoiding that white takes the center, and now actually black took the center. Another way of stopping this d4, or it's not fully stopping, but kind of keeping in mind that d4 is an idea and how to react against it, is playing bishop to c5, c3, knight goes out to f6. We've seen this already, okay? White is playing d4. And now it's very important as black to be prepared for this d4 push. So when d4 is happening, as you know from looking at it from the white side, when d4 is happening, black should do something concrete. Otherwise, white can be very happy. So in this position, we take on d4, white takes, and all the theory revolves around bishop check on b4, then grabbing the pawn on e4. Okay, so when you're playing black, every single line where d4 is happening, you want to be at least mindful of what are you going to do if d4 is happening. Okay, that's very, very important. And when you look at the theory, you often will find kind of engine recommendations, or what grandmasters are doing is some concrete way of either using that pawn on e4 that is weak, or attacking d4. We will see that later on, how we can do that when white overexpands their center and we suddenly manage to attack d4. This is important. Just one of the main ideas is stopping d4 altogether, or finding ways to react against d4 that are annoying for white. The second main idea that you need to look out for with black, or what you want to avoid, is this attack on f7, right? This annoying attack on f7. Now, we have seen that knight f6 is playing against the idea of c3, d4, right? Instead, if we play bishop to c5, what happens is our queen is actually protecting the g5 square still, so knight to g5 is less annoying. As we will see later on, theory always revolves around these trade-offs and stopping one idea, but maybe not stopping as much a second one, and that's how theory develops. So bishop to c5 is one of the ideas to say, I keep my queen out for g5, so knight g5 is not happening. You have to worry less about this f7 problem. As a general idea, whenever then, let's say, white is castling, if you play knight f6, knight g5 is happening, castle is a very, very nice way to stop this f7 attack. We anyway want to castle, and this trade that you might see sometimes in the Italian, where we give up a rook and a pawn for 2 pieces. Okay, so this trade on f7 is in most of the cases very, very good for black. Because if you're looking at this position, we have 1, 2, 3 developed pieces, where white is just standing with all of their pieces on the first rank. And again, another rule of thumb, when you have 2 pieces for a rook and a pawn, so that's 6 points against 6 points, but it's a little imbalance. It's better for the 2 pieces if we are still in the middle game. It's better for the rook and pawn if we are still in the end game. And main idea number 3 for black, and this is a more active one, but with most active ideas that black has in the opening, you need to wait for a slight inaccuracy or mistake from white to do that, is the pawn push d5. So you yourself want to gain space in the center so you can have better piece placement, maybe push back opponent's pieces. And one of the ways I showed you already is with this idea knight f6. And when knight c3 is happening, we have this very nice tactic knight takes e4. This is really something you need to remember. When the knight is able to take here, boom, knight takes, and we push d5. This is just a tactical way to achieve this d5 push, win back a piece, and now we control the center more than white, right? After, let's say, bishop dropping back, we take here, bishop is taking, we can see we have 1 pawn in the center at the moment on e5. White's pawn is on d2 right now. So we gained control in the center, kind of a mini success for black. So black's 3 main ideas you want to keep in mind is, first of all, stop or prepare for the push d4 of white. Second, be aware that there might be attacks on f7. Often we just want to castle when that is happening. That's a very good way of protecting against it. And then the third idea is a little bit more active, is when we push d5. Often needs to have a small inaccuracy or a mistake by white, or just some weird moves, right? If they just play some random moves, we can start playing for this d5 push. We know what actively we would love to do. And also, whatever usually works for white, so we had the d4, right? We had the bishop g5, the pin. Oh, we can actually also do the same pin with black. So to keep this in mind as well, again, we are 1 move behind. So this is not going to work if just super actively. But when white starts making weird moves, we might be able to pull off the same idea that you know from the white side, to play bishop g4, pin the knight, put the knight on d4, and put pressure on white this way. And by the way, before I move on to some frequent motifs, I just want to tell you that learning this way and opening can take time. So you might need to come back to this video, rewatch some parts of it, because, well, it's quite a lot of information. But this is the right way of understanding an opening, because now after watching this video, whenever you see some theory, you can ask yourself which of the three main ideas of white is white trying to achieve, and how does black try to respond. And really, in, I would say, 90% of the cases, it just is resolving about white is trying to get one of their main ideas to go, and black is concretely working against it. That's how theory builds up. So let's talk about 5 frequent motifs you can find when you play Italian game. And this, again, most of the time works both for white and black, because both sides have quite a similar setup. The first motif is something we've already talked about, is the pin with the bishop on g5 against the knight on f6. Okay, and I just want to show you a few lines where this can happen, and also then talk about, well, what is actually black doing concretely against this. So we get this when we, for example, play knight f6, we protect the pawn, bishop is coming out, castle, castle, knight is going out. This is how I generally learn, you know, lower rated players that are getting into the game, the Italian, because it's a very logical way of developing all the pieces. You put the knight on c3, knight on f3, bishop c4, bishop goes out here. It's kind of a logical way, and then you can take it from there. So black can play d6, for example, and now we push the bishop on g5. Again, if this is working very well, and it might as well, because some people don't know of that idea, right? They don't expect knight d5 to happen next move, so black is just playing kind of a random move, rook e8, right? Well, let me put the rook on a nice square, and now knight d5 is happening. Spain is super annoying. There could be h6. What is the problem after h6? Is that we can take on f6 with check, and then take the h6 pawn, at least winning a pawn already. And this pin is super annoying, right? And the main idea really is, at some point we want to take on f6 and destroy the pawn structure in front of the king, and then attack black's king. So this could, for example, go like bishop is going out, we now take on f6, pawn is taking f6, and now this is a very, very nice move. You can maybe think for yourself, what could white do here? There is this move knight to h4 that is very interesting, because we're bringing in the queen into the attack, and we are using this weak square on f5. No pawn is protecting this square anymore, and then we can continue the attack this way. So knight h4 is a very nice move to remember. Once you have the pin, once you take on f6, and then you play knight to h4, bringing the queen in, and putting attack on this king, because this king is now weak. So that's a positive way for white to use this motif. So you might ask, well, but I want to know what black should do. Yeah, let's turn the tables around. What can we do right here? So we go back a little bit. One way of stopping bishop g5 is to prophylactically think about bishop g5, and once the knight is moving out here, we just play the move h6. Again, this is how I teach my students to play the Italian game from the backside, because I'm saying, hey, this is an annoying pin. Why don't we just want to avoid it in the first place, right? So we play h6 first, then we are going to play d6, and who knows, maybe we are playing bishop to g4. So that's a nice way to stop this motif altogether. Second idea I want you to know is when the bishop is getting to g5, right? We know that if we make this move rook e8, then knight d5 is happening. Now h6 is not good anymore. So what we're doing is we're playing h6 immediately. So once the bishop is coming to g5, again, it could work for the other side as well. When black is putting the bishop on g4, right? h3, this is the same motive, okay? So h6, now the bishop is moving away. For example, we could now pin ourselves. So what is the difference, right? The bishop is on h4 instead of g5, and it makes a huge difference. So if the knight is jumping into d5, what are we doing now? What is the idea here for black? Black is going to play the move g5. So we can break the pin, right? There's no more pin on this diagonal. the bishop has to move away, or well, most likely will move away. And now we can simply capture this knight, or we can live freely, or actually we can now put on the same pin. And now we turn the tables around. Now it's very annoying for white. So playing this move h6 is a very, very important thing. When are you doing it? If the motive is already here, so the knight is already on d5, this position, h6 is not good anymore. So you need to do it immediately when the bishop is getting on g5. Last but not least, the third way of playing around this motive, again, works for both sides, is the move bishop to e6. So you can either do it after h6, bishop h4, is what I like, but you can also do it immediately. And the whole point is just saying, I put my bishop on e6. If you're trading this bishop, now I'm controlling the square d5, and also my knight has more support from my rook, so that's not a huge problem. We'll talk about the trade on e6 and these double pawns soon. And the second thing, if the knight is coming to d5, now we can just eliminate the knight, so that that pin is not such a problem anymore. Okay, so there are three ways to try to work against this motive of bishop to g5 with the knight on d5. And it's important that you choose one of them, because if you're using none of them, the game will go sideways pretty quickly. Either you stop it altogether, or you play h6 after the bishop is getting to g5, or you're putting a bishop on e6, trying to trade off the knight that is coming to d5. Frequent motive number 2 is the knight jumping out to a5 and trying to capture this bishop on c4, or the other way around. Again, it can also be the white knight jumping to a4 if there is a bishop on c5. Let's see how this works. So we go with knight f6, d3, and let's imagine that black is playing bishop to e7. So black is playing a little bit more cautiously in this line. White is moving castle, developing, sensible. Black is now playing d6. If you're looking at this position, this is sometimes very interesting. If you're looking at the 5 main engine moves, all of these moves have one thing in common. But if you don't understand the ideas, the main motives, then these moves will seem random. Okay, so here are the 5 main engine moves. c3, a4, a3, bishop b3, and bishop to d2. Okay, now you might think, what the hell? Why are these moves connected? All of these moves have one main idea, is black wants to play knight to a5. We'll talk about soon why this is now the case, and grab this bishop on c4. So we have a very strong bishop on this diagonal. Black just wants to eliminate it. Okay, and every single move that I showed you will have a concrete way of avoiding or working against knight a5. Let's go through them one by one. When we play these 3, often the idea you will see is putting the bishop here and then putting it back, right? But now, if knight a5 is happening, we are going this way. We give a check. For example, c6 is happening, and now we push the bishop on a4, and we can push it to c2. So we're not having to give up that bishop for the knight on a5. The second way would be playing a4, which is just after knight a5, we now have bishop a2 to tuck away. We can play a3, it's very similar idea. Knight a5, we tuck the bishop away. Bishop b3, why is this again an idea? It's very similar to something you've seen already. After knight a5, we can now still play the bishop to a4 check. If, for example, this pawn is going up, we now have several ideas, but for example, c3 or c4 are the main ideas that once this bishop is attacked, where are we putting it? Back to c2, right? And then last but not least, and this is the move that I would least recommend, but it has the same idea. Bishop to d2, the knight can't go to a5, right? So this is one of the main motives, and it's mostly a defensive motive, but also white can do that as well with this knight on a5, is to just take away the bishop on c4. And we often, when we play from either side, we don't really want this to happen. Now, why did I choose this position? Why can black not play here knight to a5, right? Why are we not just saying, well, knight a5 immediately works perfectly? The problem is the e5 pawn is hanging. Okay, so black first has to play d6, defend this pawn on e5, and whenever d6 is happening, or when d6 is happening, at least you have to keep it in your mind that knight a5 might be a thing that black is about to do. And it works again, it works the other way around. We're going back to the starting position. Knight f6, pawn goes out. Bishop is coming to c5. White is castling. Black plays d6. We go knight c3, right? Now, black could play knight a5 here, but if black doesn't do it, for example, castling, we can now with white play knight a4. If the bishop goes back, we play c3, we play b4, and we can capture the bishop on b6. And this I call a motive and not a main idea because, let's be honest, it's not a tragedy. Like, it's not like black is completely lost when we trade off that bishop. So it's kind of a, you can see it like a side quest. It's kind of a small idea. It can provide you maybe in engine terms a little advantage, and it can just make your life easier when you are the only one having this bishop on a nice diagonal. Your opponent will not have it anymore. So that's something to keep looking out from both sides, knight a5 or knight a4, and capturing that bishop. Third idea or third motive that you see often in the Italian game is a very interesting one, which will be pushing d4, but then not capturing back. Let's see what I mean by that. So if black plays bishop to c5, we go c3 here, knight to f6, white is pushing d4, black is taking back on d4, and there are a few variations of this, but this is the main idea where it's coming up in theory, is white is pushing e5 immediately. So not taking back on d4, but pushing e5. The whole idea is pushing this knight back. Once the knight would move, we would then take on d4. We'll talk about why this is such a huge difference. For example, black pushes knight g8. We now take on d4. And the main difference is if black plays check on b4, okay, we talked about this, check is important, but now there is no pawn on e4 hanging anymore. And so white can do whatever. They can put the knight out and have a very nice position. If we compare that with what would actually happen if we didn't include this e5 move, let's see, we take here, bishop b4 check, knight is going out, now the pawn on e4 is hanging. Okay, so this e5 move is just a hope of, oh, let's save this pawn, right? So we push e5. Let's save this pawn first. Let's kick the knight out. And if black doesn't know how to react, I will then take back on d4, have a very good center without having to give up a pawn. And there are several ways of this happening, but just it's important for you to know that, especially when you play with black, and you're capturing on d4, just that you're not thinking, oh yeah, white will anyway always capture back. No, white can play this e5 move. Now, if you don't know that, if you don't know this position, it could be a good exercise to think for yourself, what is black having to do here? So the tricky thing, and that's why this is also recommended, by some people that just push some traps or get easy wins quickly, only black way to really equalize the position here is pushing the pawn to d5. And this is really not something that the first time you look at the position, you will automatically spot it, right? The problem is if black, for example, pushes the knight to e4, then this knight is actually in big trouble. Bishop to d5, and the knight has no square anymore and is attacked. So this is already very, very bad for black. Later on, we could also take back on d4, but first of all, let's just grab that free knight on e4. So really the only way to here push back and do something is pushing d5. The idea is, en passant, is not really useful because now our knight is not hanging anymore. So takes is actually pretty good for black because now there is just a pawn on d4 that is extra for black. And if white takes on f6, that's what most people are scared of. Trades on c4 or takes back on c4, so we traded material. White is taking on g7. That looks pretty dangerous. But after rook to g8, black now has, I've already shown with the arrows, black now has this idea of obviously not castling short anymore, but castling long, has a very strong center. White's pieces are all kind of passive, and black will also, or black also has the bishop pair. So this position is actually, objectively speaking, better for black. You want to play, as I said, bishop out, queen out, long castle. You probably will win back that pawn at some point, and then you try to attack white's king that is likely weak on the king side. So instead of taking on f6, white is usually pushing bishop to b5. Now black can save their knight to e4. There is now a defender on d5. White is taking back on d4. Black plays bishop to b6. This is kind of one of the critical but also very complex positions of the Italian opening that I would suggest, if you're getting it, try developing your pieces. White wants to maybe go bishop e3, knight to c3. Again, black has this idea of bishop to g4 with the pin, maybe a weak d4 pawn. Try playing this position a few times. If you have it several times, you can try learning more about it. It would definitely be too much for this video right here to discuss this in depth. And there will be many opening videos or courses that will want to talk about positions that are way too complex. So I'm not going to get in there. But it's important to know with black that if your opponent plays e5, you don't want to just jump away, get, a crisis, oh, my knight is hanging, need to jump away. But very often the main way to go against this e5 push is playing d5 first and then putting the knight in the center on e4 where it's nicely defended. Frequent motive number 4 is not as exciting as the previous ones, but it's very good to know. It's how to develop your knight on b1 when you're playing with c3 and d3. Let's look at this. So, for example, black plays knight to f6. You push your pawn to protect on e4, bishop to c5. White plays c3, castles, okay? And now many people are getting confused. It's like, where am I getting this knight? Because you might learn early on that usually you want to put knight to c3. So what am I doing? There is one very nice route that is important to know and would also apply mostly to the Spanish opening. So when the bishop is on b5 as well. It's going to d2, going to f1, going to g3. On g3, you have a very nice knight that supports both the e4 square, can jump in somewhere in the future, and also will work against the bishop g4 idea. Let's look at everything. So d6 is happening. For example, you go rook to e1. Let's say black just plays some move a5. Knight is jumping out. Black moves their bishop away. Knight is jumping to f1. And now black plays bishop g4, right? One idea that we know already. There's one key difference. When we have the pawn on c3, the knight d4 idea is not happening, right? So it's less powerful for black when there is a pawn on c3. We can now play knight to g3. We made this nice maneuver. One key advantage is that we're protecting this pawn, but not from d2, because from d2 we would block the bishop. And also we would block the queen's idea of trying to support d4. And also, let's say black plays queen d7. Once we play this h3 move, now if the bishop would move back here, what can we do? We can trade it off with our knight from g3. So this knight on g3 can be super useful. It's nice to know that we can go knight bd2, knight f1, need to move the rook away, and knight to g3. And as so many things, you might guess it, black can also do it. So in this position, let's say again, black plays d6. We go bishop b3, or white goes bishop b3. Let me turn around the board. We're now thinking with black. We go bishop to g4. Let's use that pin. The knight is coming out. We move our bishop into safety to b6. Bishop is going back to c2. Usually to show the ideas, I just make some kind of not very critical moves from the other side. And now we are in time to play knight to e7, knight to g6, right? So you can either go from b1 with white, or with black you already have the knight on c6, so the route will be e7, g6. And what this helps to black is also to then be able to maybe play c6, d5 in the future, right? So this can be very interesting. Once the knight is here, again, we can jump to f4, or maybe we can jump to h4 because this knight is pinned. Knight on g6 can be very nice. As with nearly all of these ideas that I'm showing you for black, you can't just blindly make these ideas if white is playing ideally. Like, these are ideas that are happening only because white played a little bit slow, right? Bishop b3, bishop c2, knight b2, kind of slowish moves. If white is full on attacking you, you can't do these things. That's just not how playing black works. That brings me to frequent motive number 5. Last but not least, there is a very interesting trade that sometimes happens in the Italian, again for both sides, which will be placing your bishop on e3 or e6 respectively. Let's look at it. Knight on f6, d3, bishop is coming out, we get the king into safety, black does the same, and let's say we play knight on c3, h6, d6 is also working, but after d6 we usually play bishop to g5, right? Or that's at least one of the main ideas. So if black is stopping h6 now, oh, right, disaster is happening. We can't play d4, okay, that is very hard. We can't play bishop to g5. We can't attack f7 anymore. So our three main ideas are gone, right? Maybe we just resign the game. No, we can have some other ideas. Doesn't have to be a main idea, but it's one of the motives. It's developing your bishop to e3. And this is very interesting because it leads to double-edged positions where it might look like you're getting a double pawn. You might have learned double pawns are bad, but it's not that clear. So if we trade on e3, pawn is taking back. Now you can see that, first of all, our rook has interesting perspectives on the f file. Actually, we might be able to put more pressure on this f7 pawn. So kind of achieving one of our ideas. But wait a moment, a second thing happened. This pawn on e3 is also supporting the d4 push. So kind of playing bishop e3 is a hidden way to support two of white's main ideas. And again, speaking from the other perspective, black can also do it, and it's also interesting for black. So what can happen? For example, black plays d6. Now white is pushing d4, kind of controlling the center. And here what I just want to tell you, and this is very basic stuff, but it's important. Many people do this wrong. Many black players are automatically taking on d4 here. Kind of, oh yeah, there's a pawn on d4, I need to take it, right? This is a very different situation than when white was playing c3 and d4. The main difference is what is happening if you're taking here is you're, well, untangling white's double pawns. You don't want to do that. You don't want to take here, and white now has 0 double pawns, a nice semi-open f-file, a nice bishop. So many things are looking pretty good for white here. So when you get this or something similar with black, what you want to do is keep the tension. So keep these pawns like this, okay, and play some logical moves. For example, bishop going out. Maybe we can attack the bishop on c4 later on. We go queen e7. Maybe we can put the rook in the center, right? We can build up our position without having to take on d4 and you take away this, not very strong pawn on e3. But there's two more ways to play against this bishop e3 idea. Again, you can really think about black can do the same, bishop e6, it's kind of very, very similar. So when bishop e3 happens, what can black do here? Two main things are playing bishop to b6, so saying, hey, you can take me, I will take back, but I'm not going to take you. I don't want that you have the open f-file, and I don't want that you have more support for d4. So that's one interesting way. And a second interesting way is also playing the pawn up to d6, kind of with a similar idea, but now it gets funny. basically white is saying, hey, bishop e3, give me a double pawn, and black is saying, no, I play d6, give me a double pawn. Because also this double pawn is not as bad as it looks. We have a lot of control over the center now. We still have the idea bishop to g4, right? White doesn't have this idea anymore. We want to play maybe knight d4 in the future. Queen is coming up. Rook is getting into the center. Also kind of interesting play for black. So in these positions where bishop is coming to e3 or the bishop is coming to e6, there are really all three possibilities are open. Black can either take on e3, which often, in my opinion, is giving the easier play to the opponent. So I probably wouldn't recommend that, even though theory says completely fine. So you can either do d6 or just move the bishop back to b6 and say the same again. Okay, if you want to take me, I'm fine. Now I have this open or semi-open file. Play d6, play my bishop out, maybe actually to e6. Maybe we want to get the same idea, or we go to g4, right? Two of the ideas that we know, and we have a very solid position again. It just, everything resolves around not letting white achieve what they wanted, to put pressure on f7 by putting this pawn here and to push d4. I realize while filming this is quite a lot of information, but I'm sure it will be extremely useful for your future games. So make sure if you're still here, you can rewatch some parts of this video later. That's no problem. You can mark it and you can play some games and then come back. Oh, what was this idea again? How can I react against some of these ideas? That's totally fine. And also let me know in the comments below if you want any other openings treated the same way, explained the same way. And if you enjoyed the depth of it, or if it maybe should be a little bit lighter, what do you think on this format? I'm very happy to improve it in the future. So let's use all of that knowledge, the main plans and the motives, to understand how theory builds up. And this starts as early as move number 3. So black here has a decision. Do you want to play the knight out? Do you want to play the bishop out? There are arguments for both. And there are people that say one is much better than the other, which is not true. Both are totally playable. I'm recommending bishop to c5, and you might understand why when I tell you the trade-offs for both moves. But you can also have a different opinion. That's totally fine. So what is knight f6 doing? Knight f6 plays against one of the main ideas for white, which is c3, d4. Because knight f6 puts pressure on e4, so white can't just play c3. So usually what white is doing is playing d3, but now when d3 is happening, there is not much more c3, d4, or at least it's way slower, right? So kind of stopping that attack. So knight f6 is great, right? Well, it has a drawback as well. White can immediately play knight to g5 and use one of the main ideas to attack f7 early. And the drawback here is kind of obvious because black has to play d5, and you might have seen some videos on this. This is kind of theoretical. It's strange. It can lead to, like, black can play b5 here. Black can play knight a5, knight d4. There are different moves. Usually you get kind of weird positions, and that's why I don't recommend this, especially for lower rated players. It's just not logical positions, right? For example, b5 is a move. And now the best move, obviously, for white, like everybody sees that, is bishop f1. Huh? What? So when I see theory like this, I'm usually like, okay, guys, please stay away from this, okay? Let grandmasters do that stuff. Let's play a little bit more logical. But if you remember and memorize some lines here, yes, you will do fine with black. So let's go back. Knight f6 has a payoff, kind of stopping c3, d4, but a drawback allowing knight g5. Bishop c5 has it the other way around. Knight g5 is not possible. And I find this is the more annoying way for white to attack early on, and there are many traps and so on. So I prefer bishop c5, but it has a drawback. If white plays c3, black plays knight f6, and now white plays d4, now black needs to know what they are doing, because if you're just moving your bishop back, for example, then you're not having a good position. Takes on e5. For example, knight takes e4, and we're already in huge trouble. Queen d5, threatening checkmate, threatening the knight. you already lose a piece. So that doesn't work. And if black takes on d4, as we discussed already, if you just move back to b6, again, white has an overwhelming position, can push the pawns in the center, can push the knight out, castles, everything is beautiful. So what you need to know with black here is the check on b4. And theory starts developing from here. With all of the moves that white can play here, or the three main logical moves, black is taking the pawn on e4. Why is black taking the pawn on e4? Because if knight c3 is happening and black is just saying, hey, I'm just castling, again, the problem is that you allowed white to have everything or to have one of the main ideas, to get the center without a drawback. So that's why white is better. So black will take on e4. And this is where some of the gambit lines that you can see are born. For example, this castle move and so on and so forth. I don't want to go super deep into theory again. There are many other people that are super happy to show off what they did with their engine in 5 minutes. You can watch these videos if you absolutely need to know the theory. The important thing is to understand that, well, knight f6 and bishop c5 have both an idea and both a small drawback. And when the drawback is happening, you just need to shortly know a few moves so you survive, and then you're good to go. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to theory in the Italian is the difference between the gioco piano, you might have heard this, which is Italian for slow game, okay, and what I call, this is not an official name, gioco veloce, okay? So just that you understand the difference. Gioco veloce would be for quick play, okay? So whenever white is playing these kind of d3, castle, c3, knight bd2, knight f1, these kind of slower ways of playing, this is gioco piano. This is kind of what originally the Italian was made for. Or also these ideas with knight c3, just everything that is kind of slow. When it's slow, you need much less theory. It's really just about understanding the ideas that you've learned in this video. Develop your pieces, understand what your opponent wants, achieve your goals, maybe, pushing that d5 pawn in the center for black. If you can do that, trade on e3 with the bishop. There are many different ideas. I won't repeat all of them. When the gioco veloce, or where there is more aggression, be aware that you might need to know a little bit more theory. And this is really a general principle that is true in all other openings as well. When we see more quick play, when one of the sides, especially if white decides to do that, if white is saying, I go aggressively and quickly for all of my goals in this opening, then usually black needs to know, okay, what do I need to do? A few moves. You don't need 20 moves theory, right? You need a few moves. What do I need to do in order to stop that, right? So the gioco veloce is not the d3 stuff, but is when bishop c5 is happening, c3, d4, right? Just saying, I want to grab the center. So then with black, you want to know a few moves. That's where maybe also a little bit of repetition and memorization can help, but really just a minimal bit. Always remember that if you're never getting something in your games, you don't need to know it. Okay, it's always based on your games. And on the other hand, if you decide to go for knight f6 with the black pieces, then knight g5 is the one that, well, you need to know something. If knight g5 is happening and you're panicking and you're like, oh my god, I lose f7, you might lose very quickly. So that's the black side. Now, what is the white side? Many YouTube videos and many courses, and I'm so fed up with this, are teaching all of these quick win traps. Quick win traps are usually these aggressive quick ways, because the hope is there is a quick payoff, your opponent doesn't know, boom, I win the game. The problem is you don't learn anything. Okay, you just copied something from a guy that copied everything from the engine. Okay, that's everything you did. Okay, you didn't get better at chess. Now, when you do that, you might have quick payoffs, but you don't learn anything. So I don't recommend that you are going for these quicker ways in the opening. It might be in the Italian, so trying to play knight f3, knight g5, or trying to play bishop c5, c3, d4. I recommend that you're going for calmer stuff, where you can place your pieces, have better knowledge, have better calculation, see tactics that your opponents don't see, right? Like this, you improve your general chess game, which you can use in the Italian game, which you can use in any other opening with any color whenever you play chess. So this is kind of a reminder, not only for the Italian, but for any opening. If you really want to get better, stay away from the quick, aggressive ways that just kind of idealize winning quickly and go more towards just regular, normal chess. And I don't mean that everybody has to be a positional player, right? You can play aggressively without trying to sacrifice in the first 5 moves something, okay? You can play for an attack without just hoping that your opponent misses one thing and loses immediately, and otherwise your position stinks, okay? So doesn't mean that you need to play defensively. It just means that if there is a quick way to win early on, stay away from that. That's not proper chess improvement. My hope is that watching this video helped you understand the Italian opening. As mentioned a few times already, if you need to rewatch something, just do that. That's totally fine. This is meant to build fundamental chess knowledge that is helping you play Italian game from both sides in different positions, when it's theory, when it's not theory, to understand theory. So yeah, I hope this video did just that. Let me know in the comments if you liked that way of looking at an opening. Also, let me know which opening would you like me to look at next. And if you have any feedback on how I can improve this style of video, let me know as well. That's super helpful. Then like the video, subscribe, share it with some friends, and don't click on the clickbait shitty videos anymore. Okay, bye.